Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Drobo Broadcast Network. My name is Mario Blandini at Drobo, and today we're going to talk about email communication in a small business environment and choosing the right storage to support Microsoft Exchange Server 2010 in a small business. Joining us as a guest expert today is Peter Benoit, a consulting executive with a great history around storage and Microsoft applications, and has a consultancy that's focused on Microsoft enterprise applications. How are you doing today, Peter?
Great, Mario. Thanks for inviting me. It's good to hear everyone here. I'm really excited about hearing that Drobo has to offer for the Exchange environments. As you know, the SMB and particularly deployment of Exchange and storage has always been a large pain points and one of the big barriers, and I think you guys are going to make that really easy.
Getting to the abstract for today's session, communication, as everyone knows, is the most mission-critical app that exists in a small business, and email really is the primary mode of communication for business these days, and it's probably one of the first servers that a small business thinks about putting together when you kind of evolve from a collection of PCs or Macs in a work group into having a server, even before you might even have an IT department. And the protection of email data and reliability of that email as a service is really hinged upon having the right foundation, and storage is a big part of that foundation. And we look to examine some of the best practices approaches around implementing storage, specifically for Microsoft Exchange Server 2010, which has some improvements for small business. Before we get started, Pete, I know, having worked with you previously, that you live in the greater Seattle area and that you've done many ventures in and around Microsoft enterprise technologies. Talk a little bit about your background, particularly having started many small businesses yourself.
Yeah, so my background first is kind of exposure to Exchange when I worked for Veritas Software Corporation, and I worked in the availability products group. And there we basically, spoke to a lot of Wall Street and a lot of the companies right after 9/11, it was the early 2000s. And it was pretty clear that mail was mission critical, and the storage, the availability of storage, and the replication around storage became very important. So at Veritas, basically, I worked in the Windows division. We focused on Microsoft server applications, Exchange, and SQL. And then post that, every storage company I've done since then had to do with SAN automation. Brocade, worked on SAN Boot for a while. And then my last company was I was working at Citrix in the virtualization group. So both, and every one of the companies I worked for the last 10 years have been focused around Microsoft, virtualization, enterprise applications, and storage.
All right, getting into the meat of the program, Exchange 2010 has made a lot of advancements over the years, Pete, and some of them really do help out small businesses who are looking to deploy Exchange for the first time, but there's still a lot of terms associated with Exchange that can be complicated for some users, whether it's having database files, which are different than log files, as well as a couple of new terms for the Exchange 2010. Can you take us through some of the terms you think that are beneficial for customers to understand as they're evaluating Exchange for the first time?
Yeah, there's a couple of things you have there in the slide here, but in addition to that, there's been a lot of improvements in the Exchange storage engine in Exchange 2010, primarily make it easier for small businesses to basically deploy lower-cost commodity storage solutions like a Drobo solution. For example, Microsoft, the storage engine in Exchange 2010 basically supports much larger page sizes and coalesces I/O. The importance in coalescing I/O has to do with reducing the number of IOPS, or IOs per second, that are coming out of the back of the database, and therefore making your back-end storage much easier to configure and manage. And then you've got your Exchange databases. Basically, of course, it's always important to have that Exchange database across some sort of RAID system to protect against disk failure, and the Drobo solution gives you that out of the box. A database availability group is basically a unit of failover, a unit of protection. And what Exchange 2010, and actually it's been the prior version of that, has a component called continuous replication, so that you can actually no longer require shared storage in a Windows failover clustering group. And the advantage of not having a failover clustering is it just makes your storage configuration and setup much, much easier. You don't have to have a single disk assigned to multiple hosts. You can have one disk assigned to a host and make that exclusive. And it just makes it an easier configuration.
One of the things that's great about iSCSI SAN, and we'll get into some of the specifics of different storage options, is with an iSCSI SAN, it looks like direct attached storage to your server, but gives you the flexibility being network-based and shared, that you can do some things around these data availability groups to make it easier to set that up without the complexity of clustering. Because you could probably tell us, being deep into this virtualization technology, that a lot has evolved over the years to make clustering, at least the benefits of clustering, a lot easier. For a lot of small businesses, they wouldn't have touched it before.
Exactly. And as a matter of fact, the whole idea is that they could make it very easy to have this availability by using what appears to the server as direct attached storage. But the Drobo solution is really advantageous, because what it lets you do is sign up with direct attached storage per server. But as you move up the availability continuum and you want more servers and higher availability and replication across different sites, the ability of having shared storage in some cases really pays off. When you hear the word witness server or quorum, basically in the early days of clustering, it was very complex, because you needed to have some member that the other members could determine whether which node was really down or whether the network was up. And that was very, very complicated to set up. The idea with a witness is you just have a file share. And what the Exchange server does is it rolls the Exchange logs, which you can think of as a sequential database log. It rolls those and copies them continuously out to the file share, therefore making the cluster very easy to set up and basically allowing you to fail over if one of the servers in your Exchange fails. So I'm basically a backup for Mario's server, and Mario's a backup for my server. Jumbo frames in your network is another advantage. Besides the large I/O in the Exchange storage engine, which really helps, offload the number of I/O operations that are occurring on your storage system, so you're doing longer, bigger I/Os, which is an improvement in terms of any disk technology. The idea of jumbo frames, you can think of jumbo frames as the difference between, driving a pickup and moving a large pile of dirt from point A to point B, or basically taking a big tractor trailer with a big, huge dumper on the back. It takes you far less loads, and you can move a lot more data along the same set of roadway, and that's what jumbo frames are in terms of iSCSI and Internet, and Exchange 2010 supports those.
Great. As we get to the next slide, we're talking about the basic architecture here. For a lot of small businesses, several of these components are going to be in place. Certainly clients that will use the email server, Exchange server, are going to be there, and most folks have a network. It may not support jumbo frames. There's a benefit if they do have some switching that supports jumbo frames. In keeping with Microsoft best practices, there's a suggestion that you use a dedicated storage area network for the SAN. And that could be either fiber channel switches if you were to consider fiber channel, or Ethernet switches if you wanted to use a technology like iSCSI for the SAN. And if your local area network today doesn't support jumbo frames, the network that you were to put in place with the storage area network, you'd want to make sure you select some networking devices that do support that. Now, Pete, you can get started with just one server. You don't necessarily need a second server there to get started. What are your thoughts around starting small?
Yeah, I think for most small businesses, having a single server, the potential for a disaster or failure is fairly small. I think you can start small and start with a single Exchange server for some companies less than 200 users or even as low as 50 users. And then basically, over time, add that additional server and add more complexity. And that's where your storage makes it very easy to very simply add more iSCSI storage to servers as you add them to scale out your availability with Exchange.
Yeah, to be honest, you can start with internal RAID or even JBOD, just a bunch of disk storage in that server. But as we'll talk about in this broadcast, there's an advantage to considering an investment in an iSCSI SAN up front, because it gives you certainly the flexibility to grow into the future with a very similar ease of use and experience on the server and networking side that you would get if you had direct attached storage. So we'll go ahead and compare these storage architectures.
Yeah, and as you get to the next slide, that's a very good point. I mean, the other most important thing with direct attached storage is you're really limited by growth. I mean, if your company's growing or your mail stores are starting to grow, and again, depending on your compliance terms, that could happen. It's very difficult to grow your storage inside the box. Certain servers only can support so many slots. Yep. And basically, you're landlocked and stuck in terms of storage. So a cost-effective iSCSI SAN is a very simple way to go.
Yep, and high availability is also impacted with direct attached storage because you have fewer options for failover or mobility. A lot of it has to do with restoring from backups and other things, which it can certainly work, and for some small businesses, they may prefer that. The SAN gives you much higher levels of availability because you can more flexibly do failover or start up servers. In the case of if you had Citrix Zen server running, you could start up a new instance of your Exchange server on another server and then point it to the databases that are out there in the shared storage. That's one way to go ahead and do a failover. But when you're looking at different types of SAN, contrasting iSCSI SAN to fiber channel SAN, really the management role and the cost are going to be factors that you're going to want to consider from a small and medium business perspective. Specifically, from a management point of view, you need not understand fiber channel infrastructure nor a lot of other more complex storage concepts if you go with iSCSI, given that it operates over Ethernet IP infrastructure that you have today. And most general IT managers who have server knowledge will be able to configure the box. Some of them are less complicated than others, and we at Drobo pride ourselves in providing the absolute easiest one on the planet to both set up and manage on an ongoing basis. And from a cost perspective, costs can vary, but there are solutions in iSCSI that compare very good to other direct attached storage. And we want to let folks know that customers can benefit from SAN, but they may have been roadblocked, so to speak, in the past, either due to budget or expertise. And we'll talk about some ways that folks can get the benefits of both with their solution as they consider deploying Exchange. We're going to talk about best practices here, Pete, and these are also coming from a reference off of Microsoft TechNet. In general, I mean, you've been doing boot off of SAN for years and doing a lot of other virtualization stuff. How do you feel about the best practices in terms of sharing physical disks? Because once you go to a virtualized storage system, you have the ability to share lots of the disks. From an Exchange perspective, they still recommend that you dedicate storage to Exchange.
Right. So one of the advantages of virtualization is you want both consolidation factors and you want the business agility and availability. So, for example, the nice thing about virtualization and using some sort of a SAN or shared storage is if you want to take your Exchange server or your environment down for maintenance, you can easily do a live migration while the Exchange server is operational, whether it's Hyper-V, Zen Server, or VMware, between server A and server B. If you're using direct attached storage, you can't do that. Your Exchange server is going to be down for as long as that server is down. Second factor around shared storage has to do with migration. So again, as your Exchange store becomes fairly beefy and maybe your server fails or you need to move to a higher availability server, you're going to have more downtime if you're doing a backup and restore versus being able to basically just start up another server and assign that storage to it. So those are a lot of advantages for having a very low cost-effective SAN. With respect to the disk drive technology, most of the standard drives today are about 7,200 RPMs, and basically that form of disk can do about 72 IOPS per second, and that becomes very important for Exchange users. There's very good data on Microsoft's website regarding the number of mailboxes and IOPS, and that's something that everyone should pay attention to, making sure that the disk subsystem can be performant. And then again, iSCSI SAN is a sweet spot. Fiber channel SAN, a lot of us use it. I worked at Brocade for a couple of years. Fiber channel SANs are wonderful, but they are complex. You do need, in some cases, a very seasoned administrator to manage both on-host bus adapters and the fiber channel network. It's different. iSCSI SANs basically are using the same network that you have today. You do want to have an isolated network for your data so that your data traffic doesn't impact your message traffic and vice versa. But nonetheless, it's basically using standard known IP backbone.
Great. Looking at the next slide, when you're leveraging iSCSI for Exchange, new technology around the DAG capabilities, database availability groups, would allow then folks to use a shared storage device but then have multiple databases and really have a higher availability configuration. So while they might start with a single server, if you pick the right storage, you have a migration path to a solution like this, a two-member DAG in a single site, which, as described by Microsoft, is the smallest HA configuration here. But it's not really as complicated as clustering. It really does help folks who have a small organization but want a little bit of HA both for their mailboxes and for their data. You having been involved in the technology for a long time and having also owned small businesses yourself, how do you feel about this particular innovation on the Microsoft side?
So Microsoft has a technology which is called continuous replication. But the idea is that you can have single storage on a per server basis that looks to the server like it's direct attached, but you can grow it, you can share it as you add more and more Exchange servers and have more high availability clustering. But in this situation, for a simple two-node company, you can get great availability by basically having two dedicated storage ones. And Exchange is basically replicating, if you were to say the server on the left-hand side is my server and the server on the right-hand side is Mario's, basically, I'm replicating some of my databases over to you, and you're replicating some of your databases over to me. So in which case, it's an active and a standby location. And if one of those server fails, then basically the other server takes up the databases. And what's nice about that is it's basically a very effective, very simple way to move up the availability continuum for small businesses.
Indeed, if you wanted to get more information on this particular configuration, the full details are available on Microsoft TechNet at the URL at the bottom of the page. As we put it all together, we have a solution here which talks about implementing Microsoft Exchange Server 2010. It can be a single server deployment, or if you wanted to have a second server as a standby, that could be one way to do it without this idea of a database availability group, or you could choose to do it with a database availability group. In either case, having a network either comprised of dedicated VLANs for your storage traffic or a separate standalone set of Ethernet switches to provide the connectivity between the iSCSI storage and your servers, that gives you a solution which can be low cost as well as lower in complexity to allow you to roll this thing out. And for some customers, they may start out with a more simplified configuration of a single Exchange server. But whether you go with the basic configuration or one that includes high availability, the iSCSI SAN storage gives you a great platform not only to scale up as your storage needs rise, but also provide the type of connectivity to storage that's necessary to enable these higher availability configurations. And if you look on the right-hand side, there's a product out there in the marketplace, a popular product for a first-time simple start iSCSI SAN solution. We're showing you configurations with 16 terabytes, meaning there's 8 drives to provide more spindles for better overall performance in the system for your Exchange environment. And looking at the comparable Drobo offering on the left-hand side, you can save 37% or keep the total solution under $8,000 as a building block for your Exchange environment. For a lot of folks implementing their first server, they can find it a little bit overwhelming, all of the other components that are required to put it all together. But in this case, it can be kept simple with a iSCSI SAN storage device that's built for SMB IT, using either VLANing or some dedicated switching on the network and a single server approach. As we look at the next set of reference material, Pete, I know that you looked through a lot of this stuff, and while you explained it very simply for us, there are lots of details when it comes to setting up Exchange. I mean, what's your advice if someone was to go out and read some of these materials? They can seem a little bit complicated for the small and medium business. Are there any pointers that you'd provide some SMB folks who are looking at implementing Exchange for the first time?
Yeah, I think my favorite place to start with is basically the storage design website for Microsoft is a very good one. But the one that says Understanding the Mailbox Database Side is a very nice 2-page. It's very easy to understand. It talks about the importance of memory per databases. And it gives you a blueprint, the tail end of that paper for basically sizing your storage subsystem. And it tells you, how many users you're going to have and what's the number of expected mailboxes per day. And the highest number of mailboxes per user per day, they scope out as 500, which may sound like a lot, but I can tell you at Citrix, when I was running an engineering teams love distribution lists. It's really quite easy to get to that number, even though you may not read them all because you haven't gone into a junk folder or deleted folder. But it's a very good white paper that very easily explains Exchange storage configuration. But more importantly, it gives you the parameters you need to understand how many users are going to need in your company, what sort of behavior they're going to have, and what sort of storage system you have. The other thing that I want to mention about the Drobo system here is we look at these Exchange environments, and Mario said this over and over again, how easy it makes it to start off single server, 2 servers, have a database availability group, improve your database continuum. But over time, the important thing that's happening under the covers in Drobo is you can add storage on demand. You can swap out disk and add more capacity. And if any one of your drives fails, you're protected. It isn't doing a lot of the complex load time you might get with some of the higher-end systems that do complex RAID 5. So I think these white papers here are a great starting place for small businesses wanting to configure their first Exchange environment, and I think Drobo makes it happen.
Fantastic, Pete. We're going to get into the question and answer time right now. I have a couple to start off with, Pete. I mean, do you really need dedicated switches for iSCSI, or can I just use my regular old network? It's a question that a lot of people have because they know they have ports there. How do you feel about separating that stuff? Is it really more of a performance thing? You want to keep them separated because of service levels?
I think for service levels, you want to have them separated. But quite frankly, for beginner, depending on the size of your companies and the network traffic, as long as your network switch supports VLAN isolation and you have some ports available, it's a good way to start it. It's really a function of the size of your environment and what you're trying to accomplish.
And for a lot of folks, they have modern switching equipment that does support jumbo frames and VLANing, so they should be able to go ahead and do that. But it wouldn't be the end of the world if you just connected the stuff straight away. The best practice there is to provide isolation. But the great thing about iSCSI is that you can leverage your existing infrastructure if you wanted to.
That's correct. And as a matter of fact, that's a great way to start off, is to leverage your existing SAN switches. Most SAN switches today support jumbo frames and at least some sort of VLAN isolation.
Hey, when it comes to these database availability groups, Pete, in 2010 here in modern times, do small businesses even need to think about clustering anymore, or really is the path forward leveraging technology like data availability groups and then looking to do things around server virtualization to provide more of that kind of failover and availability?
Well, server virtualization in generally requires a clustering technology of some sort for the failover across the group. So you do need a little bit of that. And even with the database availability groups, it is still a form of what Microsoft calls a lightweight failover clustering, in a sense that you have that when you only have two servers, you need some member that votes. So if your two servers are me and you, and one of us fails, how do you know I'm really down? And the idea is to have a simple file server that's sitting on the
witness
side.
server, as they call it.
Right, what Microsoft calls a witness server. And he's a voting master. As long as two of us can talk and neither of us can talk to the other guy, then we know that we can still take over his load because he's truly down.
So the clustering concept hasn't gone away. They've just made it a little bit easier in modern times. I think the server virtualization also makes it a little bit easier to do some of that stuff than it had been configuring specific clusters. Certainly back to the days of a Y-SCSI cable where you use that as your shared storage. Things have gotten a lot easier.
Yeah, it's got a lot easier than it used to be. And the whole idea with the witness share is to make that easy so you don't have to set up the shared storage. Setting up a shared storage gets more complicated, but it's a fundamental requirement as you scale up the number of Exchange servers.
All right, we'll go ahead and take a look at some of the questions that have come in around small business server. It's one of those things customers are thinking, do I go small business server to start, which supports Exchange, or is it better to do a standalone Exchange server? Do you have any thoughts in that area?
Yeah, I think it's a function of your customer size. My advice, and again, the advice on the Microsoft website may vary, but in general, if you're a small business of probably less than 50, preferably 25 employees, small business server is a real sweet spot in that number. You can get as high as 100, but I think once you start getting above 50, and again, depending on how much mail you're dealing with on a daily basis for business reasons, setting a dedicated Exchange server at some point is a good idea, whether it's a function of the number of people or basically the number of mail that you deal with as a company.
Great advice, Pete, and thanks for a great session today. We have a couple questions that have come in. We have a question here about performance. And we have a customer here who's been running some VMware guest machines and found that their performance is not as good as it could be. And the best practices from a Drobo perspective when running VMware or any IT applications is to make sure that you're running 7,200 RPM or better server-grade drives that will provide much better level of service. And the Drobo firmware for Drobo Elite version 1.1, which was released back in December, has provided some improvements to performance and just announced Drobo's new family of solutions, storage for business products. We have our 2.0 software that will be shipping in March 2011, and existing Drobo Elite customers will have the ability to download that 2.0 software and see some additional improvements to their environment. So a combination of making sure that you have the right type of SATA drives, 7,200 RPM or better server-grade style drives, along with the latest software will make some benefits there. There is no plan to offer SAS drives for our 8-bay SAN storage for business. We announced our 12-bay SAN storage for business, which will be available in the middle of Q2 2011, and it will provide support not only for SAS drives, but also a mixture of mechanical and solid-state disks, which at that time will really benefit applications such as Exchange, who do small IOs and will get much better levels of service for those mixed workloads when mixing a combination of solid-state and mechanical disks in the same system. So that's going to be exciting coming up. We look forward to working with you there. And if you go to our website today, drobo.com, you can sign up for an evaluation when the 12-bay SAN storage for business product comes out. That might be a great solution for you if you're looking to put something together there for improved performance on a Exchange solution. Hey, a question about cloud. And one reason I'm glad we got you on our broadcast today, Pete, is you're very in with cloud and Microsoft Azure. what if a company already has an existing cloud storage for their internal intranet? Can a solution with Exchange be used in conjunction with that? How do you mix kind of locally hosted and operated applications like Exchange with cloud?
One of the first ways that you want to basically leverage the cloud storage is more from a daily, sort of a data extension. When you think about as your email grows over time, but you need to retain mail from a compliance standpoint, is using most of the larger backup companies today can basically do some archiving for Exchange and use that for Azure storage. And that's a great first way to sort of slowly start to migrate to extending cloud storage. So you're not having to buy more and more capacity on premise for stuff you very seldom access, but you still need for compliance reasons.
The Drobo philosophy around cloud is that it's a great solution for a lot of small businesses, for some businesses that have a lot of data. Example, classic Drobo customers like videographers and photographers who have large amounts of data. The cloud may not be practical for a couple reasons. Performance may limit them, given that they may not have a very large pipe to the internet to get the data to and from their cloud provider, but also the monthly costs for large amounts of data can become prohibitive. So in this case, Pete, if you had Exchange locally as an IT application for your company, you could selectively put backups of that into the cloud as a way of doing an off-premises backup and not necessarily have to manage the cost or the performance issues of having it all in the cloud. Are you seeing that as maybe one way to mix the both?
Correct. As a matter of fact, there's some companies doing that. Companies, particularly small businesses, want to basically have really keep their costs under control, and you want to have a very rich experience, on your premise where you're getting your mail and everything is performant. But as your email grows, you very seldom look at old emails, and basically there are companies that are starting to provide sort of seamless migration for that. And I think that's an area of high interest that I have is how do you make that rich experience for customers, leveraging their existing storage, but let them leverage the economics of cloud storage for archival data.
Key takeaways from today's broadcast, folks. Email is likely to be one of the first servers that someone implements. And if you're under 50 or 25 employees, users in the environment, you might start out small business server, which is in its own right an Exchange server. Or as you're growing larger, you need to provide that rich experience that Pete talked about to really enable the communication between your users and between the company and its customers. We feel that choosing the right solution for storage has a big impact on how you both protect your email data from a failure of drives, but also the service levels, because inevitably you're going to have to move, migrate, and otherwise provide high availability for that Exchange service. And starting with a platform that enables high availability from the start and even more in the future is an important choice criteria. And we feel that Microsoft Exchange Server 2010, with its advancements around how database availability groups work, really make iSCSI SAN an even better solution, both from an affordability and ease of use standpoint, but also just a fit into the overall solution. So with that, we thank everybody for participating. You can send additional questions to tv@drobo.com, and we'll reach out to everybody individually who asks questions to get specific answers to you. Thank you very much for participating, and thank you, Pete, for joining us today on today's broadcast.
Well, thanks, Mario. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
This concludes this edition of the Drobo Broadcast Network, and we'll see you next time. Until then, happy sharing.